Welcome to a new episode of the Vital Point podcast. I'm so grateful that you're here. If you're watching this on YouTube, go ahead and subscribe to the channel, hit the bell so that you get notifications of new episodes. And if you're listening to this on a podcast platform like Spotify or Apple, I'd really appreciate a review. It really helps to get the podcast in front of more people. If you know somebody that would really benefit from learning about different transformational practices, go ahead and, recommend it to them. I'd really appreciate that. One of my goals with this podcast is to get people curious and excited about different transformational practices. So if you know somebody that would be interested in that, send it along to them. And I appreciate you being here. When it comes to self-development, no matter the method that you're using, the vital point is to practice. And that's why the name of the podcast is The Vital Point. If you're looking to learn methods to transform your life and actively grow into the potential that you know is inside of you, you're in the right place. I'm your host, Jonathan Schechter. I am a psychedelic integration and transformation coach. I'm a breathwork facilitator, and I'm also an enthusiast of personal growth. I love listening to these conversations just as much as you do, and learning about new methods, hearing people's stories. And, the point is that you have the capacity to evolve and bring your intentions and dreams into the world. And there's never been more access to so many incredible modalities that can help you on your journey. At the same time that we're bombarded by all these things that are vying for our attention and, trying to steal our time away. This podcast is really a counterpoint to that and is here to help you learn about new methods to bring into your life and give you practices to follow, share stories from practitioners who are doing the work so that you feel inspired to go and practice, because that's the vital point. And this is a really special episode. Today's guest is Matt Gottesman. He's a two-time founder, two-time podcaster. He's a writer. He's also an agile digital marketer and strategist by trade, with a background in helping some of the world's most iconic brands like Louis Vuitton, Moët, and Hennessy. And nearly a decade ago, he decided to reconstruct his own narrative by taking to the internet to create, build, and publish to the world through his own brands, as well as to communicate to the masses at the intersection of culture, creativity, spirituality, and entrepreneurship. I mentioned he's a podcaster. He hosts two amazing podcasts, Hustle Sold Separately, and a new podcast that's a daily podcast called The Niche Is You, which is really awesome. And he's a real inspiration to me personally. And I just appreciated his authenticity, his willingness to share knowledge and listen and, just be a supporter. And he's in this really amazing space where he's at this intersection between business and spirituality. And if you're familiar with the show, I've had him on before a long time ago. Really excited to have him back. And, we just get into this really amazing conversation about that intersection between business and spirituality, being authentic, having a connection to yourself, to your creator, to your purpose. And Matt was gracious enough to share his daily practice as well, which includes journaling, gratitude, breath work, and prayer. And so I hope that you get inspired to pick up these practices if they're not already a part of your life. And if they are, maybe it'll give you some good ideas on how to expand and strengthen what you're already doing. And I just found this conversation to be really inspiring, and I hope that you do as well. So enjoy. All right, Matt. So welcome back to the Vital Point podcast.
Thank you for having me back. It's good to be here.
I think the last time you were on the podcast, it was called One Question Wednesday. So we'll be able to get into a little bit deeper conversation today, which is nice.
Yeah, you said one question, but I think we must have gone over like 20 topics. So I appreciate you for that too.
I literally think that you were the last episode with the One Question Wednesday format. And it was because I was like, okay, we're not talking about one question anymore, so I have to be respectful and not paint myself into a corner with that.
Right.
So
yeah,
I really appreciate you being back.
absolutely. Great to be here. And thank you again it's an honor to be back on here.
Oh man, like I've just been so appreciative of everything that you've been doing lately, and like the workshops you've been putting on. I feel like I'm learning a ton just from seeing your examples, seeing your workflows, and it's given me a lot of ideas, which is fantastic.
Yeah, it's interesting because you know this about me from my content. Like, I love business and I love spirituality, and I love the intersection of the two because if we're in our work, if we're in our art, if we're in our soul, how we deliver that to the world, and how we manage that to the rest of the world in acts of service. So it's like on the business, like when the workshops and the digital, and I get to, and it's a vital thing for me to, hey, here's how I'm doing it. Let me show you how you guys can do it, and which very much feels true to a portion of my purpose or my mission. So thank you for being a part of those as well.
Yeah, no, it's just it. There was something that as I was looking through some of your content this week, just looking for little gems and inspiration. There was something there that popped up to me about that you had posted recently about, the gist of it was you don't have to like tell people what to do. You can just demonstrate it by the way that you live.
Yeah.
And that's something that I really appreciate.
Yeah, I mean, I can go in a lot of different directions with that. I think sometimes we are trying to talk ourselves into what we know we should be doing. And so we talk it out to the world, and you have to be very careful of that because who's on the receiving end of that, and what's their soul path, and where are they at, and what are they doing. And so often at times, if we're looking for validation, be careful who you're talking to, and sometimes we're not. Sometimes we're just wanting to talk it out because we just want to talk it out and feel out what we're feeling inside. And that's why I think having really great people around you is important. But the greatest way to lead, in my opinion, is by example, right? If I don't ever want to give advice and not be taking it myself. And I want to demonstrate, like, I think I've always been that person, and even when I was a child, like in school, like, I'll go first, like, I'll figure it out. Like, hey, you know what? Let me dive in and see what happens, and then not necessarily as a guinea pig, but as a just not being afraid to try. If we take too much time to think about doing something, we create all kinds of other stories in our head that aren't necessarily true, or could very well be very false, and mess with us. And so that was something that I was reading about this recently too. It's like the moment you have an idea or you really want, like, something that just really resonates with you, try it as quickly as you can. Don't let too much time in between not doing it. And so yeah, we don't have to explain ourselves. We just have to try. And in this day and age, if it's part of being of service to the thing that we want to build upon, do it in public. I call it, the build in public movement, which is like, hey, I'll show you. Like, I'll lead by example with humility. Here's where I'm at. Here's where I'm at. Here's where I'm at. And you just kind of keep talking about it along the way. And I think that is more helpful to others, right, than talking about what everybody should do, right? Let me show you what I'm doing, and maybe that'll spark something in you, and maybe then we can all, like, run together. So that's kind of, I think, where a lot of that comes from.
Yeah, what came up as you were talking about that is sort of this shift, and, like, not to say that we're not getting help or hiring people to assist us, but that shift from you're sort of a product of, like, a company that has promotional teams and A&R and, like, these big budgets,
right.
And the idea is, like, we have to get you out to as many people as possible, shotgun out to the world in trying to get millions of people's eyes and ears on you, to really being able to, like, find your own tribe.
Yeah.
And, like, find the people that just vibe with you and that are going to follow you for your energy, for your message, for the things that you're putting out into the world, and that you don't have to like be known by the masses, because the people that are supposed to be around you and that like want to vibe with you will be with you.
I want to earn it the whole way. And I don't want, of course, when you're really rooted in your purpose and what you're doing in your art and, or in your content, of course you want, the world to have access to it. I just don't want it from a place of, where you get too many people in there that say, here's how we're going to do this, here in this strategy, that strategy. And it's like, I don't want to bypass the beautiful steps of that come from earning and the process and building it like a community. You're building a brand or building yourself like a true community. It's just different when you do it that way. You ever see underground artists who really stayed true all the way through to becoming famous? I mean, they really did the long game journey, and they have fans that are still there. They're like, I remember you from day one. We live in a time now too. It's interesting to watch. I've watched a few content creators where, and some of my folks have been around for like 8 years, and it's interesting to watch the community grow with you, especially because you're growing. And if you speed that up too quickly, did you bypass growth, like your own internal growing, and almost kind of create a whole new audience off of the hype versus the personal development and growth? And yeah, you may see people come and go, of course, but like, it's just, I that's for me why it's so important to like earn it and grow it. And of course I obviously want the same distribution as, the masses and as, some more popular, quote unquote, whatever you want to, call that, people have, just from an earned place where it's organic, it was grown, it was nourished and nurtured and earned, and community driven. And then I just, from that, I would feel a lot more, just like I stayed, I didn't compromise. I didn't compromise my values. And again, I'm not saying that some people who took massive steps did. It's just that sometimes the hyper growth that comes from injecting kind of external modalities versus, the more organic way. Now you can move faster organically, which is what some of the workshops were about, right? Like, how do you move organically faster? Great. Now I'm being smarter, versus, giving away that power and giving away that energy that's, from how I perceive and how I want to create this. So yeah, there's a lot of things in there for when you were saying, like, the growth aspect for sure.
Yeah, there's a couple of things that just popped out just as you were talking that I feel like we could explore more. Like the first one being the benefits and the things that you learn from the process itself, and like why you don't want to jump ahead or just outsource everything to somebody else, because you're actually preparing yourself for what you want. And like I've read things where, people that have gone viral, for instance, just to sort of keep it on that topic, like they talk about the problems that come with that. Like when you're not ready to scale, when you're not ready to have that many people coming at you, or have to answer them, in your inbox, or, just you're not emotionally prepared for trolls or like people that are just going to have negative energy that you just don't have when, you're just building sort of by yourself and building it up. And like, I guess I can relate to that in terms of like, I feel like I spent a lot of time, sort of just going through the motions without seeing any return or any growth. And it gave me this opportunity to make mistakes and also to move at whatever speed that I wanted to. And all of a sudden things started happening for me. And I was like, whoa, okay, now I actually need to like manage my time better.
Exactly.
I need to have systems in place because now, like, my time is actually more valuable because there's people waiting on me. I have clients. I have an audience for this podcast. All these things that before, it's like, oh, if I can do that tomorrow. Well, now I can't really do it tomorrow because there's an accountability there, and I want to show up and be of service and continue to grow the people around me and the community around me. So yeah,
That's
it's
exactly
it's
it.
you know and I think the interesting thing for me is, like, I feel like when I look back at my life, some of the most important lessons and the things that, like, I learned from or helped me grow the most, when I look back at them at the time, were things that I was like, oh no, this is awful, or like, how could this have happened, or like, why is this happening to me? And then when you look back on it with hindsight, you're like, oh wow, that was really
Right.
a blessing in disguise, as they say, right? Like,
Always.
there's a reason that that's a like a saying.
Always. The process is the win. And a lot of people want the end. And it's funny because I always say the destination is death. Like, because when you're done is when you're done. Not, because if you're living, anytime you get to a new place, there'll always be more work to do if you're alive, right? So the process is the win. And the process is where you're like, oh, that's how I do learn about managing my time. Oh, that's how I do manage my money. Wait a minute. Here's how I learn to say yes and no. Here's how I learn to trust myself. Here's how I learn what's for me and what's out of alignment. Here's what feels good, and here's what feels like I shouldn't be giving my energy to that. The process is the win. And when you look at it like that, you're like, oh, I'm in the game. I'm just basically trying to master my game. And I think that's the part that sometimes people fundamentally miss. And you're right, because some people who, like, they blew up fast or went viral, whatever it might be, they might miss a step, and it's like, oh, this money's coming in, and like, how are you managing it? Well, I got somebody else doing that, or I got this and this, and like, had you learned to manage money before? They're like, well, no. Like, you might want to look into that, you know. Or delegating. You have too many people, like, doing too many things. How do you know how to give it direction if you hadn't really ever, like, messed with it yourself? We do need people and systems for scale. But I always say that there's a balance between get into the activities that are needed most, so you have a basic understanding. Some you'll be able to do and keep control over. Others you're going to have to eventually get others to do or employ systems. How will you be clear? Because you had already been in the act of the process of, like, knowing, like, oh, no, I'm hiring you. I need you to do my bookkeeping like this, and this. But you're a bookkeeper, so, like, show me exactly what you're doing differently than how I was doing. Like, oh, perfect. I get that, makes sense to me. Thank you for showing me that, and I know exactly what you're talking about because I was messing with that, and I was too slow doing it. You're faster. That's why I'm hiring you. But I know how to ask the right questions. Or let me use these things because I know that this is what will make it go faster than I could possibly do it. The process breeds clarity. And the clarity, as you probably saw in one of my posts, brings direction. Now we can decide what are we spending time on and what are we having others or systems spending time on. And ultimately, but like, that clarity is so beautiful because now we're able to communicate with ourselves, with others. Like, we know what we need and want, and it just gives us direction. Right? And which is like life. These are things we need in anything in life. So that's why I say the process is the win, and it's just mastering that game, really.
Yeah, and I think the same applies to the internal
Very much.
process and the internal
Very
wins,
much.
right? Like, just to take it back to that spiritual
Yes.
aspect. um that's for me personally, like, I feel like that's been the biggest thing that I've learned this year. Like, I signed up for a business coaching 1 year mastermind this year. Biggest investment that I've ever made in myself. I literally thought that the hardest part was going to be opening my wallet, because that took some, like, oh, is this safe, is this good, is this right? but once I put my credit card down, I was like, cool, I did it. Like, this is going to be smooth sailing from here. And it's just been a constant learning opportunity of like confronting the limiting beliefs that I have, confronting the fears that I have, confronting the messages that I learned from my parents about money and success and safety and jobs and like moving into an entrepreneurial place, and everything along the spectrum of that, so it's like it's a constant learning process and expansion, of as I go through that process, getting to the place that I want to be at, and having the capacity to hold those things, to stand in that space without freaking out, without like, some sort of limiting story holding me back or keeping me from taking advantage of an opportunity that is right in front of me, that because I'm preparing for it, because I'm doing the work, I can actually like see that and be like, oh, okay, cool. Like, it's time to take that jump. It's time to take it to the next level.
Those,
So I think that just as we're talking about that finance and the business skills and, the external, the same thing applies to that internal experience.
yeah, those jumps into new territory because they feel right, but we don't. I talk about this a lot. We don't have any data, but we feel it. We feel it's the right thing to do. We have no data. The body freaks out, or can freak out, and the mind freak out because the body's using data. It's using historical evidence through muscle memory of how you've been making decisions up until today. And now suddenly you're going to do something completely different and unrelated, and without any knowing, without any data, without anything. The body's like, whoa, 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 wait a minute, excuse me, I'm going to freak out now. And I find that fascinating how the biology works, and just our internal guidance system. But the irony is that it's like, well, because you have two things happening internally. You have your muscle memory in the physical form of your body, which is used to how you're making decisions. And then you've got this internal guidance system that's like, no, this just feels right. What do you mean it feels right? Can't really tell you. But once I start moving in it, I'll have some data for you, And
Right.
that's a whole other, that's also part of the reason why it's difficult often to tell people a feeling. Only people who are moving within their intuition and taking risks and embracing the unknown and moving with purpose, or have, again, taken great risks, usually will understand you the most, right? Everybody else is like, oh my God, what's going to happen if this, and what's going to happen to that? And you're like, you know what? I can't, and it makes sense because your path is not their path, and their path is not your path. And if they're really not trying to drive their path, but they're trying to play it safe within their path, oh God, you're glitching their matrix. Like, the moment you tell them, like, well, it's just a feeling, like every single fiber in them is probably freaking out on, like, Jonathan, what's going to happen? You're paying for this, and you're getting a business coach, and then you're moving in this direction, then you're going to do that. But, what all of these things, and you're like, I got this. And noted, I will not be telling you anything ever again. Sometimes it's just like you realize this kind of like, okay, they're on the do not tell list. I understand, and again, no harm, no foul. I have empathy. I get it. They may be in a safer role, quote unquote, which I don't even like that word safe, because I'm like, you're in a role that is seemingly safe, but can be taken from you at any single point in time. But nevertheless, it's been sold to you as safe, and that's what you're playing from, and it's bringing you great life, money, house, whatever, all this stuff, whatever. And you're fine in that sphere, and anything that breaks that sphere, even if you really don't like what you do for a living, it doesn't matter, because this is your quote unquote safety bubble, right? So.
Yeah, and sometimes it's not even what's really safe. It's
All.
just like you said, it's those signals from the body that are saying this is what's safe, even when it's dysfunctional, even when it doesn't work, even when it's like holding somebody back. That safety of the familiarity of the body sensations is what's known. And like, just like you said, the unknown, create lets the body go, whoa, wait, what are you doing? Like, don't, nope, nope, nope. We're just gonna. And I love what you just said. You know, like having that discernment for yourself,
Yeah.
because unless you practice discernment, you're not even sure what is yours and what you're projecting onto somebody else based on what they're telling you.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. It's
so that's and.
Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, please.
No, I was gonna. There were, you know, everything we were just saying was another one of these posts that like really resonated to me recently. You know, the real question is, can you abandon what's safe for what's certain,
Oof, yeah.
especially when it feels uncertain, knowing you'll have to trust your gifts and path
Yeah.
without knowing the how.
Yeah, that's
Like
yeah.
that just so lands to me.
I literally right before, so that was what my my mini podcast episode was right before I jumped on with you, was from that article. Um, Your purpose is not uncertain, you are, and that was my most trafficked article to date on Substack, and it raised a lot of of questions from people on it. And can you abandon what's quote unquote safe for what is certain? And we sometimes tie safety to certainty. If you're basing safety on the external world, I'm sorry, that is not certain. That can change on, especially because it's out of your control. That can change on you at any given point in time. And I've been very fortunate, although it was a little painful at times, to have witnessed that with life over the years, from things to people. And when all of a sudden they're not there, and you're like, that seemed pretty safe, like, and you're like, and I thought I did everything right. You begin to realize, oh, wow, this is an inside job. Everything is an inside job, period. And so we have this idea of safety. I say certainty is when you really connect to your soul and you really connect with God and you really connect to yourself and have this relationship, you feel it, what you know. Everything else you may not know, but you know these feelings inside. And our purpose is very much a discovery process, but because the more we connect with ourselves, right? But you start to realize, like, oh wow, now that feels just right. That's certain. That is certain. We may think we are uncertain about it, and we may not know the how. That's why we have to rely on faith and trust and our gifts and our talents. It's like, why did I come here with these talents in the first place? What's really going on? And then I acquire these gifts along the way. Maybe I can use that for this thing that I want to be or do in this direction I want to go in. And the more you keep connecting with yourself, like, it's so fast now, like that. I hear it every single day. I'm like, yep, I got it. And then that practice of listening to yourself, trusting yourself, right? In a world that is very distracting, very noisy, and very like, no, look at me over here. No, this is safety. No, this is what you want. This is how you should feel. Whew, I give a lot of credit to people from decades ago, but I give some of the most credit to people now who really just beeline for their purpose, for their thing, for whatever it is that they want to build, or for being in their lane, because there has never been more distractions than there ever have been right now. So it's a gift and a curse, because the curse is it can distract you, but the gift is it can literally be such a beautiful contrast to kind of align you in, oh wait, after you've run out of resources on the external, you're only left with one choice: yourself. Internally, you're going to have to go and be like, I got to solve this. I gotta know who I am, don't I? And it's like, yeah. And I've had this conversation with a few people when they finally came around. They're like, and I got to kind of figure it out, don't I? I'm like, yeah. They're like, and no one's really coming to save me, are they? I'm like, no, they're not. And they're just like, and I have to change my choices. I'm like, probably, and make better decisions. I'm like, yeah, and I have to make sure I know what type of decisions I'm making from doing the work. I'm like, pretty much. I'm like, welcome to your soul ascending while you're here. Welcome to why we're even here in the first place. And it's cool to watch when people do that and they're like, is this what you go through? I'm like, every day. Because I don't want them to feel like time doesn't matter, just being in the game does. And so that's I think the other thing that I try to do a lot with my content is I want people to know, like, I'm not like further along, or, I mean, yeah, I've definitely got a lot of practice in me, but like, I'm in it too. And I have my days, and I want you to know that, like, that's why when people say to me, they're like, how are you in my head? How do you know? Or especially on like my texting, right? Like, how do you know? How do you always know what to say? I'm like, I go through it too. Of course I know how you're feeling. We're both humans. I'm just going in we have different paths, but pretty much, you know, we're experiencing a lot of similar things. So
I was watching this interview with Wendell Pierce recently, and he said something that as soon as he said it, I thought of you. And I'm so glad that you just brought up what you just brought up. He said something like, and I'll paraphrase because I'm not going to get it exactly right, but he said, the more specific your art is, the more universal, relatable it becomes.
there you go.
And I was like, whoa, that, because he was talking about like, being on the wire, and how every city he would go to, people would come up to him and be like, I relate to that show. I relate to this character, and I relate to this. And like, and how is that? Like, I've never been to Baltimore. And he's like, because the art is that specific,
Yeah.
that it just becomes
Yeah.
universal.
That's
And I was like, wow,
so
that's such a
good.
cool idea.
That's so good. I'm gonna have
Yeah.
to use that. That's so good. It's so true. Like, um, that's why, you hear the word authenticity a lot thrown out. It's just funny because I remember when that first started becoming a word for like used for marketing. I'm like, really? I'm like, why weren't you using it before? Just in general. But authenticity, like, you're gonna win with honesty. It's the ultimate blueprint. It's the ultimate business plan. I think people, when they talk honesty, it's like, oh, I have to have conversations I don't want to have. Oh, like, I got taken advantage of. I'm like, no, you still need discernment. You know what I mean? But like, that is also honesty.
Right.
But when we're very honest with how we're feeling and we're channeling that life force through to our work and our art, people feel it. Like, it's like, thank you. When we get into overthinking mode, what do the people want? What are this? What are that? Like, listen, like, yeah, I mean, we definitely want to, if we're in service to the general type of audience, yeah, of course you always want to be asking questions. It's a two-way dialogue. But for the most part, don't overthink, just serve. And by serving, you will figure out, oh, you don't need this, but you want that? Got it. Thanks for letting me know. Makes my life even easier. And I can even double down even more so on that because that's an area I prefer too. Huh. Oh, interesting. You know, or like the more we create from this very organic, authentic, internal knowing. Yeah, of course it's gonna be universal. Like, how did you know? Like, God, like, I'm like, because I'm you, you're me. We're different paths, but like we're all fundamentally here to have our souls like do what they're here to do. But like universal laws of values and honesty and love and respect and all of these things, like these apply to all of us. So can we have that conversation? And if we're having that conversation, I think people feel more of like, at ease. Like, okay, it's not just me. Like, no, it's not just you. It's all of us. And I think society is so good at separating. We see it in religion. We see it in celebritydom. We see it in influence. We see it in so many external things. We separate the people out when we're all fundamentally the same. Now, we all fundamentally have a lot of responsibilities and accountability, and we have to do the work. But I'm just saying that, like, when we get separated is when we start to compare, or we start to not believe, right? Or we start to like feel restricted, and we feel like a loss of identity, or we go through identity crises and things like that. And that's why I think it's so, again, to your point, it's an internal thing. We have to connect internally and have the conversation with ourself and our soul and God. And like, honestly, like, I love the relationship I have with myself. Like, it's been cool. It's been cool to watch and feel it out. And I'm like, like I like you. I like what you stand for. Like I like how you handle that. And and it sounds so funny, but we don't do it enough. People just don't do it enough. And then I started realizing, I'm like, oh wow, like if I'm having this great relationship with myself, which then turned into a great relationship with God, it fundamentally changed every way I am to the external world. One, I would never let anybody treat me lesser than the way I would treat myself. So there's discernment. But at the same token, I also now know grace because I'm like, oh, wow, like I get it. Like, who am I to judge anybody? But doesn't mean that, we're going to exchange for longer than a certain time period if we're not really jiving, well. But I'm not taking it as personal because I have a relationship with myself, right? So the internal is like sets us free.
Yeah.
We could probably go like more rabbit holes there if you want.
Yeah, no, I mean that process sounds a lot like reparenting yourself, is one way that it's sort of put in sort of a different context of like, changing that internal voice, having a better relationship with yourself and celebrating, and being proud of yourself. Like it took me a long time to realize that like a lot of the time I'm not like that internal voice. I'm not really proud of myself. I'm not celebrating. I'm just telling myself what I could do better or how I'm not good enough or like, these are the things that I should be doing instead of being like, hey, today you did some like cool shit and like, I'm proud of you and like, look at you go, and I think the weird thing for me is like if it's happening for me, it's probably happening for other people too. When my internal dialogue is like that, it makes it harder to accept 100%. And hear the things that are coming from other people.
100%. We still,
like somebody might say like, oh, wow, I love this, what you're doing, but I'm not really hearing it because inside they're like, nah, like they're full of shit.
We still have to deal with our personality. We still, I have been very hard on myself at times, 100%. So I don't want to remove, we've got internal voice that can mess with us. The thinking mind can definitely, be influenced and strayed and all that stuff, 100%. And, the relationship I have with myself it's not just like lovey-dovey, kind of it's just a real one. Like I was watching, and I forget the name of the actor, but I've referenced this before, and he was speaking in Oxford. I think he's an English actor. He was speaking at Oxford, and he was saying, you ever, like a friend ever mess up so bad, and they were really in the wrong, like really, really in the wrong. And he used a few other words, but I wasn't sure we were allowed to use them on your podcast. So he's like, they really effed up, right? And everybody's like laughing. He's like, and you're like, you know what? You're okay. It's gonna be fine. You're fine. Like, did you learn something from this? Like, and you're like kind of coaxing them and helping them and nurturing them, but like you didn't judge them. You're just like, okay, that was bad, but let's I still support you. It's like, you ever wonder why you don't do that to yourself? Seriously. It's like, why don't you have that relationship with yourself? And that's what kind of was a turning point for me, where I started thinking about like, I just wanted to have a relationship with myself that was real. It wasn't like in light of anything. Like there's plenty of moments where I'm like, I was wrong there. Like I can hear myself be like, brother, like I love you, but like you need to own that. Own it. You were wrong there. Make it right. Or what could you have done better? Now that's when I can remove the thinking mind, which by the way, those two can cross over because the thinking mind is like, yeah, you really screwed that up. You did this, you did that. We have to balance, which I think, by the way, is what brings us kind of to the, at some point, like some of the modalities or the different things that I do during the day, or why I started tapping in so much more to, with journaling and breath work and God and prayer and meditation, all these things, is because we have to quiet the mind so we can allow the soul to do its thing, right? And that's what I was. So the relationship I have now, like with my soul or with like myself, it's like a values based way of being. It's a values system. It's a values like, so a lot of times, all times I'm celebrating myself because I'm showing up. But sometimes the conversation is definitely like, hey, listen, did you listen there? Did you hear what he or she had to really say? What could you have done better in that moment? or which, they talk about this in a lot of different religions, and in Judaism, whether the morning or the evening, spending 10 minutes in the evening, be like, hey, thank you so much for the day. I feel so blessed. You know, looking back, here are some really things I was very proud of that I did. Here's some other things that, I think I'm going to work on. I can get better. Why is it that athletes, right? Think about it like this. Kobe Bryant was Kobe Bryant because he watched the reels. He watched his tape. He rolled it back every single day. He was in mastery of his craft. You have to do that with your life. You have to do that with your life. You have to be able to roll back the tape and be like, oh, wow, what a great move I did there. I'm going to do more of that. Oh, I might have missed a step there or two. Okay, I'm going to tweak that. We have to be an active participant with our life, and I think that's why I think that's why you see a lot of people on autopilot, because that requires work to be an active participant in your life. But it's beautiful when you are, because then you move differently. You start to be like, all right, I'm starting to see things a little bit differently. And then, that is a whole other navigation, because as you start to pivot yourself from how you've been operating, people change, places change, what you say yes and no to changes, a lot of things change. And then you're managing all of that emotion inside, including the body. Oh, wow, how long was I operating like that? And so, that's where grace comes in. But if we're having that relationship with ourselves and we're having that relationship with God, we're going to have grace with ourselves.
Yeah, 100%. I couldn't agree with you more. Though I've said it to other people. I've asked them to say it to themselves, would I talk to myself? Would I talk to my best friend?
Yeah.
The way that I'm talking to myself right now.
Yeah.
If I'm treating my best friend better than I'm treating myself, what's wrong there?
Right.
So 100% agree. So for you, how do you build that relationship with yourself? How do you strengthen that connection to God and to yourself, and that motivation, or navigation rather, that you were talking about?
Well, and it's been such an interesting topic for me lately too, because I have people of all faith and cultures and backgrounds that contact me. They're like, I like the way you use God. And I'm like, because I'm not boxing it in. I'm not boxing God in. I'm not boxing the talk in. It's universal. God is in everything, and I'm not separating us from God, which I think sometimes religion at times can do, depending on if the man-made side of religion is enforcing it, or if the spiritual essence of what it was meant to be, is guiding it. So those are two very different, conversations. And so I love connecting in a way where I remove the separation and stop making it so, if I do something wrong, or if, again, it changed when I started having a different conversation with myself. And I'm like, I get it. I totally get it, And I was I like to say, God's like a comedian in a way. It's I'm having these conversations and everything is so simple. It's so simple. And you realize, and the questions and the answer, the riffing is just, it's such a fun, I'll say something and I'll feel it do you not know what do you not think that I don't know what you need? I'm like, no. Yeah, of course you do. And do you not see that the beauty in this and that? And it's so simple and fast, but we have to slow down to be able to have that kind of conversation. And sometimes, and it's so like last week I was having a conversation. I was referencing this on a podcast. I'm in my car driving. I had a very long drive. And I had a very specific question around a topic. I'll leave the topic out just for the time being. But and I remember I heard it. I felt it right away. It was like, do you not know what's coming? Do you not actually feel that in your soul? I was like, yeah, actually I do. And do you not think that I don't know exactly what you would need? Do you not think that was a perfectly orchestrated design for you? And I was like, it's a fair point. That's what I'm saying. It's a funny conversation. And I'm just like, okay, and then it's but you cannot receive anything if you are attached to something that is counterintuitive to it. And it hit me like a ton of I was like, oh shit, I was like, got it. Cannot receive the essence of this thing when we are so attached to something related to that subject, if you will, that is not it. It's just not it. And it hit me so hard. I'm like, oh, wow. Like, yeah, let it go. Like how, like, wouldn't you want to be in the perfect, like, receptivity of this? And you're like, yeah, like, let it go. And it was so simple, but our complex minds make everything so difficult, right? So modalities you were asking. A big thing that happened for me first started with, I've been journaling and writing for years. Last year, my ex-girlfriend and really amazing friend, she's now a great friend, we would do journaling prompts. And there were a few journal prompts that we were doing, and these journal prompts turned into me like writing out what I was feeling, thinking, no matter what it is, good, bad, depressing, positive, whatever. And I'll explain what they are in a second. And like it's 5 different prompts. The first one was morning thoughts, feelings, and intuition. Because it's typically done in the morning. When you're most connected, you're coming off of sleep. Morning thoughts, feelings, and intuition. You don't have to do it in the morning, but thoughts, feelings, and intuition. And what was interesting is, imagine you're writing out what you're actually feeling or thinking or what you know. Like, and so I was doing this for like a year. After a while, it turned to me, I started writing to God. I'm like, I'm just going to freehand to God. It's like, hey, I'm feeling this. I don't even know where this is coming from. And I don't know why this is like plaguing me. And so not just writing it, sometimes I was actually saying it out loud. And as I'm doing it, I started like feeling answers. I was like, what is this? I've always felt a connection to God, but I don't feel like I had a relationship with God until recently, where I was like, the way you would like a best friend, just talk. We're so caught up that it has to be like physical. Why? Well, we all seem to believe in energy. Well, energy is invisible. Why can't you feel it? Right? And so I started to actually have a relationship with God that was more of like a best friend and a mentor and a father, and like it made the concept so much simpler to me. I'm like, oh my God, like I get it. And then if I'm made in the eyes of you, like now I understand people even more. I can meet them where they're at and not take things personal. And, so it'd be like, even if I was thinking something or I wanted to gossip or I'd see what people were doing, I could feel like, would I judge you like that? I'm like, no. It's like, it becomes this like organic, fun place where it's not so constricting the way I think society has sometimes made it. So I was doing these journal prompts. That was journal prompt 1. And as I was writing, I started like actually getting answers for myself. And I'm like, oh, okay. This makes sense. And then of course, applying, right? It's one thing to pray, but it's another thing to integrate. We have to practice. And one of my best friends said to me, we dated years ago, and it was about 3 years ago. And she said something so profoundly simple, but it changed my course of a lot of things. And she's like, I know you know what you want. I know you know what you want. But you're going to have to get in the game and meet God. You're going to have to play for it to happen. You have to get in the game and play. You got to meet God. And it hit me so hard because I was like, you can't sit on the sidelines of life. You have to be in the game. But if you integrate what you've learned, if you've integrated the teachings and the lessons and the experiences, now you're in the game. You're like, no, I can't. No, I can't date you. No, I can't take that money. No, I can't do that. Like, you're representing the value systems. You're representing the truths, the knowing. You're playing the game. You're meeting God, right? And I had you could stop me if this is like too much of a rant, whatever. But it was very helpful. And then I had a rabbi tell me something that was very interesting, and he said, "There's a Hebrew word called hishtadlus, which means effort." And he said, "Everything is effort, everything." And he said, "All we have to do is show up consistently with effort, and when effort is finished, God takes over." Right? It's the same as like saying like the harder I work, the luckier I got. When we're in the game and we're playing, whenever it is finished, meaning like you've exhausted yourself in the field of battle by being in the game and by being the values and by building and by exhibiting this character and these behaviors. Of course, you can't do it alone. Of course, the miraculous has to happen. It will. And so those two things were really something that set me off. And so in the journaling, you've got that. That's the first is morning thoughts, feelings, and intuition. The second was what was it? Oh, 3 like goals and tasks or tasks for today, just for today, to be present. What are the 3 things that we'd love it if you got them done? That would be today, right? So you're in motion, you're in activity. Number 3 is, what am I grateful for? We have to get present. What am I grateful for? What am I grateful for that I have now? What am I grateful for where I'm heading? And gratitude, you hear often people talking like an attitude of gratitude, and they're great. They're right. They're 100% right. I like trying to, again, simplify that. What's happening is when you look around at, especially if you're in the effort or you're in the game of life, which we all are, that's why we're here, and you think about where you're at, it starts to give you perspective of where you've come from, even if it's only inches, right? And there's always something to be like grateful for, and that's kind of like grounds us. It gives us something to be like, okay, and then when we're grateful for what's to come, we have a better relationship with it, and we're in more receptivity mode to it, because we can feel it, and you're not expecting it, you're thanking it. It's a way different way of approaching it. And then the fourth thing is, what's like something fun or adventurous that you can do today? Why is that important? Because we have to pull ourselves out of our minds and put ourselves into an activity of something. It could be a walk, it could be exercising, it could be swimming, it could be biking, it could be painting, it could be music, whatever. But we have to pull ourselves out of a place, sometimes that is where the thinking mind is taking over a little bit too much, or we're pushing it too much. We have to have this balance. We think everything has to be so hard, and it doesn't. We've made it hard. We have made everything very hard. And I'm sorry, I don't believe we're here to suffer. It's just that we have made ourselves at times suffer. We all have at different capacities. That's not, I don't believe, how life works. We have free will, so we clearly are the ones that have kind of inflicted a little bit of that onto ourselves. And I know there's a lot of people who might say, well, my circumstances, this and that. Like, I understand. You could literally walk right outside the door and right across the street and right into the next town over and be done with it if you really wanted to. It's just, that's the beauty of free will, right? The cage is in the mind. So the fifth thing is, who can I serve or pray for today? That was a very interesting thing for me, because I would start to feel either your usual people that you automatically think of. I even started thinking of people that I hadn't thought of in a long time. And it made me think about the energy dynamic of, oh, they may really need something right now. And when we can do that, we pull ourselves out of whether we're taking things personal. Sometimes it's people that you may not be friendly with anymore, or you're having something currently with. You start to realize, oh, wow, like they're going through something. Anybody that is not approaching you with love, respect, honesty, really respect overall, like all of these things, like if we're not careful and grounded in our own selves and having this relationship with ourselves, we're going to take it personal. And thus the fight begins and the division does too. So these types of modalities kind of put me into this place of like, something's going on with you somewhere. And you may be completely unconscious of it and you may not even care. I'm not going to probably spend too much time around you, but I'm removing myself from the situation, but like, I'm going to wish you well because like, you may need it. You may really need it. You may be unhappy. There may be something going on. And the way I'm able to identify that is because of the relationship I have with myself and God. And so it's this big loop, right? So that's what I do from a journaling standpoint. And then I mentioned to you the breath work that I started doing recently. There's, I think, a lot of different ways that it's labeled. The way my good friend had shared it with me is heart coherence. And it's 5 breaths in through the nose, 5 seconds of breath through the nose, 5 seconds out immediately through the mouth for 5 minutes. And it helps connect the mind and the heart, especially when the mind gets a little quirky, which it does. It does. Like you said it earlier, it does. It totally does. It's going to happen. There's just days, especially if you push yourself a little bit harder that day, it's going to happen. So that breath work I recently started doing in the last couple of weeks, and it's been actually a game changer. I try to either do it in the morning or when I'm having a moment in the afternoon. I'm like, oh, okay, like let's bring it back. What's interesting is these things really breed self-awareness, and they hold us accountable to ourselves. And we're putting ourselves first, basically, is what we're doing. If I'm feeling something, or if I need to know something, or if I want to move in a new way, or if I want to do something, instead of me relying on an external world, which is all over the place. I mean, it's really all over the place, and we don't have to go there. But and I'm wanting answers faster. Well, let me just look to me and use some of these different things that are out there, which, by the way, cures a lot of anxiety and depression because you're kind of like less anxious because like you feel more. I have no control over the external world, but I can definitely have control over me and my emotions and my feelings and all these things. And the greater relationship I have with myself, like the less I'm like, stressing out about certain things. And I'm like, well, kind of saw that coming. So I was already like prepared, so doing these 2 things have been game changers for me. And then like, I'll use some like meditation apps like Calm, mostly because I like guided meditation. It's like, 10, 12, 15 minutes. It's nice to just like have that guided voice that is, I don't do the whole silent thing. That's not really I would love to. I just, to actually have no thoughts. And I've heard it's a game changer, and I'm sure one day I will probably get there. So instead, I like to work with what I've got, which is either a guided meditation because it's giving me something to concentrate on, or like a meditation where I can just reflect and be grateful and do what I would do journaling, but in the meditation, and it allows me to just ground within myself and make crazy good decisions throughout the day because I was like already in alignment. Like, oh, that's an alignment. That's not. That is. That's not. You already know. You already set up your whole day. It's like a calendar, like because you already know like where you're at. So the moment something that's like not alignment, you're like, yeah, no, that's not good. That's not good. And I'll finish with this. I heard something from Dr. Joe Dispenza a long time ago, which was most people will wake up right before they have to jump right into the wheel of their life, the hamster wheel of their life. I'm paraphrasing, but what's happening is they're jumping into a life that is only a repeat of everything up until that day. Versus if you get up like 2-3 hours before and spend time with yourself, you can actually set up your day versus, jumping into it and repeating the previous days. So now you're operating from a place of forward, brought present versus jumping in and repeating. And so when you're thinking about like, well, what do I want and what do I need and what would be better? So then when all of a sudden the thing that was going to repeat itself, you're like, no, that actually doesn't resonate with me. I'm not going to do that. No. So you can like cut it out and start to move your way towards exactly where, you're most called So those are some different modalities.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot there, and there's a few things. Like, I love that the gratitude and the praying
Yeah.
part of your journaling. Like,
Yeah.
there's that what am I going to do that's fun and exciting in between those things? Like, I feel like there's something in that sequencing of like priming yourself with the gratitude, and then like, okay, that now what am I going to do, something like that's fun and expansive, and something that, speaks to me on this different level, not like, oh my god, I have 50 things to do for my business, and all that kind of stuff. And then that you're kind of wrapping that up with the with praying, and thinking about others, and how can I be of service. I love that. Yeah, heart resonance breath work
Heart resonance. Yeah.
is legit.
Hmm.
No joke.
Game
Um,
changer.
it's something that I practice every day, and it's just a beautiful practice. And I love what you said about Joe Dispenza. It's funny. I've been meaning to ask you, like, because I just assumed, just based on some of the stuff you write about, and you talk about it, I'm like, he must be into Joe Dispenza, but like, we never talked about it directly. But yeah, like, um, creating the future that you want, like priming yourself for that future instead of just going off of the past, because it's so easy. Like, we've been living with it for how many years,
Right.
our whole life, possibly, and some of those patterns are hard to break. So it takes that repetition, it takes that effort, like you're saying, and that consistency. And that's another thing that, like, I appreciate about your message and what you put out there, is being being open to trusting that
Yeah.
consistency, and trusting
It's
that
everything.
effort, and like not getting ahead of yourself. Because like, it's so easy. I hear it from so many people of like, well, especially like when we're talking about like psychedelics and like integrating these really big sort of paradigm shifting things, or like changing, rearranging your whole life. It's like, well, have some, like you said, have some grace for yourself, have some patience. Like, these things don't happen overnight, but if you show up consistently, day after day, sometimes breath after breath, or like you said, having those practices to stop yourself as you start to sort of go off the rails, and like have that reset of like, oh wait, is this in alignment to what I'm creating, to what I want to create? That just compounds,
You,
and it builds, and like all of a sudden you find yourself like, whoa, I've look how far I've come. That this the small consistent effort trumps everything.
everything. The compound effect is so beautiful. I was having this same conversation with what you just said with one of my trainers, and he was like, and he's very into the same, things, and we were talking. He goes, the thing about the body is that the consistency, like, you already know the outcome. You know it. You know it. You know it. You know it. How much time depends on the person. You know the outcome. You know the outcome because it's a tangible thing. And he's like, if you can apply that, Matt, to what you're saying in your message with like um, the consistency of showing up for the things that feel uncertain but are really certain. He's like, he's like, the consistency will keep the score. It really will. He's like, the only reason why it works with the body so well is because you can look at somebody and say that's a tangible result. But we know what it took to get there. It was all work, and it was consistency, showing up every day. We have this conversation because I'm on year 3, and it's so crazy to like see like even how the body's like changing. I'm like, okay, and that's why like I urge people, like, you got to take action on yourself, because you're like, the consistency in everything. You know the outcome. I can't tell you the when, but you know the outcome. And the when, well, that's different for every person, right? But you know the outcome. You should get comfortable knowing the outcome from the consistency. The other thing I was going to tell you too, by the way, is with Dr. Joe. Yeah, I read Supernatural. I think it was Supernatural, Becoming Superhuman, Supernatural, right? One of those like years ago. Sorry, Joe, if you ever catch wind of this. My apologies. And then just that when he was talking about that whole the morning setup and all that other stuff, I haven't really read as much of his stuff in the last like couple of years, but the content was interesting when you brought up about the content. I was recently talking to a couple of like rabbinical, anybody listening, rabbis, very amazing humans, and they're like, what's fascinating about you? They saw my content. They're younger rabbis. They said, I saw your content. I was like, yeah. And they're like, it's fascinating that you're speaking Torah, but you're not immersed in necessarily Torah. And I said, well, yeah, I get that. And they're like, it's beautiful. Like, and they were being very complimentary, not like, oh, they were actually very loving about it. They're like, it's fascinating. Like, and where does it come from? They were, that was a test. And I was like, God, I was like, experience and taking experience and taking, life and, taking messages and like, let's have that conversation, publicly to everybody, on a mass scale. Right. So I like the fact that it's like you got the science folk who are amazing and they're just like, Joe, like I love how Joe gets closer and closer to spiritual because the science helps him understand it. And then you got the spiritual people who are just naturally spiritual and they're like, we like looking at the science to like try to make sense of like how did that like random miraculous thing happen, It's so funny because where is everybody heading? All to like their oneness of themselves, right? So I'm that person in this fun world in the middle of like, trusting in that which you can't see and living life through experience and then sharing that with the world. And then like, just trying to become a better human being in the process. And it can be very challenging. So, but yeah, I just want to share those two things with you.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I truly believe, and it's something that I've experienced myself within an ayahuasca ceremony, that like everything that is quote unquote woo-woo or magic, especially like if you want to say magic, is just science that we don't understand. And like we have the hubris to walk around thinking that we understand everything when there's, like you said, the energy, you can't see it, but doesn't mean it's not there.
Right.
I mean, like it's all around us. So we carry it around in our pocket and, it's just floating around, in the air. And everything that we understand today as science at one point was magic or at one point was woo-woo,
right?
Back into like fire.
Yeah.
Like that was the experience that I had in this ceremony was like, oh, that's why fire is so healing. That's why there's fire ritual and healing around fire in every culture, because at one point that shit was magic.
Yeah.
Like you have fire, you keep me warm.
Yeah.
Like we've been doing it as human beings energetically for millennia, basically like for most of the time that we've been human beings. Right. Yeah. And like, of course there's healing. Of course there's energy around that. And the universality of spirit, like I love that you've talked about that. Like when something is true, it's not really, you can't put it in a box of like, oh, this is this ism or this religion, it's true regardless. And, it makes me think of, a rabbi that my father, was involved with for a lot of my growing up, who like basically sort of had a falling out. Like he had like a crisis of faith and started going into Eastern religion and studying Buddhism and Hinduism and Taoism. And right before he was like, okay, I'm done with Judaism, something within him said, I'm going to go back and like re-examine some of this stuff. And he came back to it and realized, wait, this is exactly the same things that I've resonated with and I've studied and that have like struck such a chord. And so like, even though, he's still, is a rabbi, he's able to like incorporate that universality of it. And, Yeah,
Isn't that something?
it's one of the things that I love about Buddhism, is like how close the things that we're learning about quantum physics,
Mm-hmm.
and like the cutting edge of science, like is to these things that like someone was teaching thousands of years ago. And also, when I got involved in Buddhism like 20 years ago, um, there was something that I read from the Dalai Lama that really like struck a chord, which was like, if you can disprove something that's in the Buddhist teachings, we have to throw it out. Like, cause yeah, there's things like from a science perspective that like were written hundreds of years ago and we've been able to disprove that. So why would we keep that around? Like why would we continue to follow that? We've uncovered more of the truth. And like it's our job to be close to the truth and be aligned with the truth, not to follow some sort of dogma just because it's there. It's already what's established.
God is so brilliant. Again, the sense of humor of it all. God is so brilliant that, like, I know, I'll make science, and science will help. Like, bring more and more over time. Understanding of different miracles and quote unquote magic and other right. Like other things that like were deemed magic at one point. The miracle of science. Like, I know, I'll make science. I know, I'll make this. I'll do that. Blueprints everywhere, you know, all saying sort of like the same thing, different interpretations, right? And I know, and I would never want to alienate any culture because I think there's just so much beauty in all the cultures and in all the religions, actually. Um, I just, to your point, most of it, or all of it, is really centered around kind of connection to self, connection to creator, right? And
Yeah.
how that got separated and divided, with mankind, obviously created separation, etc. But the gist of it all is that, and it's celebrated in whether religion or non-religion, of oneness, like because and in religions a lot of times talk about that. Like I can't really speak on a lot of religions, but like Mashiach in Judaism, oneness. We all become ourselves at oneness, in which we all then realize we're all connected at oneness. I've heard that in other religions and modalities, and other things. Now, obviously, there's a lot of different, different interpretations in different religions and things like that. But like, so, if we can remove all of the, and I don't want to remove out of any kind of disrespect or anything like that, just more out of like too much of the overthinking, and we just kind of get it right down to like, oh, connection to myself and understanding my soul, connection to creator, right? Connection to God. So that, and then we start to see all of the miracles and under examination, whether through quantum mechanics and physics to, science to like, I love the fact that we're able to like study how intuition, it's just like scientifically, how does intuition work? I'm like, well, that's going to be a fun, like, I would love to like see the studies on those because it's like, and watching the brain waves, like what Dr. Joda is like watching what's happening in the brain or in the pineal gland, right? When we're just in our knowing or just doing certain things, it's like fascinating. So again, even that was made by, ingenuity of man coming from God. And it's like, oh, you want to understand me more? Great, here you go. Even more so. So, and again, like I never want to ever remove the beautiful teachings of culture and religion. I just don't want people to feel constricted by it. I want people to feel more connected themselves into God from it, not, and not separated. So,
yeah.
Connection
to self and connection to source, and then finding that blueprint that helps you
navigate,
get closer to that, get more connected to that.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
So,
well, this has been a fabulous second conversation. I just am so grateful for your time and for all the wisdom and experience that you shared.
Thank you.
What do you got coming up? You got another workshop coming up, and are those going to be regular things?
They are.
Yeah.
I've got a couple things coming up. So we're doing, my brother and close friend Nadim Al Hassan We're doing these workshops on, just on, we're living in this time where we want to help simplify the mental suffering that comes with, building your passion, building your brand, building your business, whatever it might be, really, in a digital age. But it's very systems thinking to approaching your, what you're building and the reason being. And we're going to kind of start really actually turning that into an entire community of systems thinking applied models. Why? Because how do we reduce the friction, the cognitive overload, and the barriers for what we want to build, which are in alignment with ourselves, which are in purpose, but in a digital savvy world. And since we come from backgrounds of that and we love doing it, like we're going to just show people how to do it, and like we're all just going to run together. So that's been a fun way of being of service. And then also we did it in a way where we wanted to take in a lot of data over 3-4 months of like, where are the people really wanting, and what are they, what is the most optimal way to run this as a community for them. So that's fun for me because, I have an agency around systems, but look, we're becoming more, like Naval says, 1 to 4 person businesses. That's really what we're becoming. And why not apply a minimalist approach with systems thinking that also makes you like scale what you love, but also love what you do and not get burnt out. There's a lot of burnout happening, especially like as we were talking before we started this, like with systems and with doing all the things online. It doesn't have to be that way. And the algorithms, if we get stuck playing the algorithm game, we can get really in our head. So there's this mental thing happening, there's a spiritual thing happening, and then there's like a professional thing happening all at once. That's why we were like, big component of why we're doing this community. We're like, nah, let's create a massive community and like run together. Like, let's like, here's the play, like, here's what we did, here's what we tried, here's some tools we're using, like, here's the metrics that come with it. Like, that's the future of it is really gonna be like, and then everybody can be like, oh, I tried that, here's what I altered, this is what happened, and everybody's basically just kind of sharing, like a knowledge sharing community that allows, our self to scale, our life and our business. So there's that. I am launching a second podcast. It's a personal podcast from me to my audience. And, you get the text. So, like I'm kind of warming up right now and how often I do texts, which has been amazing to actually like, again, it's been actually an interesting thing for me because people are very much like, how are you in my head this morning? And I'm like, I get you. I don't know, but I get you, and so I'm launching this new podcast. It's meant to be daily. So I'm in the middle of batching that. And really, that's actually the platform for everything else I want to do in the next several years, which is it's actually also going to be a book. It's also going to be a journal. Then it's going to be a book for men. Then potentially be a book for children. And potentially a book for relationships. Like it's meant to go into kind of like a series of things that I'm really excited about because it's very much in alignment with purpose, my purpose, and like having these types of conversations like we're having, simplifying where possible, and kind of bringing more people back to themselves and like uncomplicating like life and creativity and their highest self, pursuit of their highest self. Like let's uncomplicate that so we can allow the people just run. Like let the people run their race. So I'm excited by that. And so yeah, hopefully the book Q1, Q2 of next year. It's like been like
awesome
5 years in the making. So I'm working on it.
Beautiful.
Yeah. And
I'm excited to read it.
So that's what's going on.
Very cool. Well, we'll definitely put some links on the show pages to connect with Matt. Would highly recommend that. I've been getting your texts and they're super inspiring. Really appreciate that, that other aspect of it, to get those little notifications at the right time instead of like having to sort of search it out or sift through the algorithm and all the rest of the content that we're getting.
Right.
And if you don't follow Matt on, either Twitter or Instagram or both, you're missing out.
Thank you.
That's all
Wow.
I can say.
Honored, brother. Thank you.
I mean, this conversation should be a, just a little taste of what you can expect, the kind of
Appreciate you.
inspiration and, yeah, you're super inspiring to me, sir. And I appreciate you. I appreciate the generosity that you've had towards me, personally, being able to reach out to you, being accessible, sharing, knowledge, sharing experience. And then the workshops that you've been doing have been really phenomenal, and just the value that you guys are providing. And I'm a systems geek anyway, so like that stuff just like totally like lights me up, just
Right.
seeing somebody else's workflows and their craft and their processes, because it inspires me. And it's like, oh, it gives me ideas, it gives me inspiration, and it gives me hope, because it's like, oh, well, here's a blueprint, here's another blueprint, a different type of blueprint. And if these guys are doing it, then I can do it too.
I
So
love that.
appreciate everything about you, brother.
Thank you, brother. I appreciate you too. Love you, brother. I really, really do appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah. And I appreciate you sharing your vital point. I know we didn't like mention it verbatim, but I feel like we talked it out like through the podcast of, tapping into your soul and the conversation with God.
Yeah.
And, that you provided some value for people to try out themselves.
Amazing.
So
Yeah.
thank you so much.
Yeah. No, thank you. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Well, thanks for tuning in to another episode of The Vital Point. And remember that regardless of whatever the modality is that you're practicing, the vital point is to practice. So get on those journal prompts tomorrow or even today, and keep it up. We'll see you next time.
Bye, guys.